Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my November wrap-up. Now for the month of November, I feel like I got to every long book on my TBR. Every book I read this month, maybe aside from one, was well over 400 pages long, so for that I am rather proud. Before I dive into the books themselves, first I have a very exciting announcement, and that really exciting announcement is I have actually launched a podcast with one of my dearest friends on this earth, Monica, and we created a podcast called Cozy Club, and this podcast is basically about us just discussing all of our favorite cozy things, from books to movies to TV shows, and just general chat as well. We have been best friends for many, many years, and we're so thrilled to be able to create this thing together and also share it with you guys. If you are interested in checking it out, I will leave a link to our website down below. On the site, you'll find a variety of links kind of linking you out to your preferred platform for listening to podcasts. We're so thrilled about this passion project, and we're really excited to finally share it with you guys. But enough of announcements, let's go ahead and dive into my wrap-up for the month. The first book I got to this month was a book that has been long on my TBR for this year, and just in general, one of my most anticipated fantasy releases, and that is Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is the third and final book to the Foundry Side series, one of my all-time favorite fantasy series, and I was really curious to see how Robert Jackson Bennett was going to wrap this trilogy up. I'm happy to report I feel like he actually did a very good job. Ending a trilogy is no easy feat. I always usually find third books to actually be my least favorite in series. For some reason, conclusions just don't always land for me, so I was really happy that I liked this story from beginning to end for the most part. But if you're not familiar, the Foundry Side fantasy series follows one of our main characters, Sansia, and Sansia, introduced to us in the first book, is a thief, a very talented one at that. She lives in an area called Foundry Side, and in her world and in the city that she lives in, 80% of the land is actually controlled by very powerful merchant houses, and they basically have these walled cities where people live and work for these really rich institutions. The remaining 20% is called Foundry Side, and it is completely lawless. This is where our main character, Sansia, thrives. In the beginning of this book, she's actually hired to steal an impossible object, which she does because she is, again, very good at her job, but this sort of sparks a conflict between the different merchant houses, and Sansia finds herself in the midst of this conflict. This series is all about heists and kind of the underdog taking on an insurmountable power and using their wit, cleverness, and teamwork to basically overcome this. At the heart of this book too, there is just a huge cast of characters that you will fall in love with, and a magic system that is just truly so unique. I basically describe it as magical coding. When you know the language of an item, you can basically rewrite it to have it function differently. You can write a brick to be stronger than the average stone, if you will, and you can do this to all different sorts of items and artifacts, and the magic system throughout this entire trilogy just evolves so much. It's fascinating because it's so research-based. As characters kind of put themselves to solving different problems, we're constantly having new breakthroughs and new application of the magic itself, which is so cool to uncover. That being said, I was very curious to see how book 3 was going to wrap up. Every installment just continued to raise the stakes, and the action is non-stop from page 1 for each book in this trilogy, the third one also being the case. Initially, I was a little disoriented just trying to figure out what is going on, but once I kind of got situated back in this world and with these characters, I realized like the reason why this series is so successful is you have characters you love, and the emotional stakes of this world are very, very high, and it feeds into why characters are making the decisions that they are. And so when you see the plot sort of play out, it becomes much more like significant to you, not just because it's entertaining, but you feel so invested in the overall outcome. Not to mention, I feel like the author built on this world very, very successfully. I wasn't sure how he was going to write this insane level of stakes, but I actually thought he did a great job. And I actually feel like he was able to achieve this with having time skips at the beginning of the story, which I think worked really, really well. Overall, again, I was happy with the ending of this trilogy. It was such a ride. I love Robert Jackson's writing. I've loved both of the series I've read of his. I'm really looking forward to see what he gets to next, but I would give this final book in this series a 4.25 out of 5 stars. There were some pacing issues in the middle, but I'm really just kind of being nitpicky here. From there, I wanted to continue to pick up some books that were really high on my my must-read list, so I decided to read Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercult. This is a new release that I've just been highly anticipating picking up because the style of this book just really seemed to be one that I would really enjoy. This is like a modern folklore story. We're following two estranged siblings, the Yaga siblings. The first is Bellantine, who is a very focused and determined and hardworking woodworker, and we also follow her brother Isaac, who is basically like a thief and street performer. These two siblings have not seen each other in years, and they're also separated by miles and miles of the American highway. In the beginning of this book, though, they are both notified that they have received an inheritance. They live in a world that is basically exactly like our world, but magic does sort of exist here, and also like buildings can become sentient. So when they arrive to receive their inheritance, it's not land, it's not money, but it's actually a house on chicken legs who is very much awake. From there, both siblings kind of fall back into each other's lives, and things especially begin to get complicated with the arrival of a dark force which has arrived on the shores with the house itself. This is a story about these two characters. We're rotating between their perspectives, and you really get a deep dive into a lot of their motivations, their fears, their frustrations. This is also a story about the complexities of family, following two very estranged siblings trying to bridge that gap once again. Their relationship is incredibly complicated because they both kind of are jealous of the other, and they both hide from their own trauma in very different ways, and how they respond differently is kind of what they wish they could do themselves. The siblings also have kind of unique and very specific to them magic, which is really interesting to uncover. The book itself almost reads like a road trip story, but instead of everyone being in a van traveling across the country, they're inside a house on chicken legs that is very much alive too. Interspersed between our present day chapters of the siblings basically trying to take on this evil force and rekindle their very complicated relationship, we actually get chapters from the house itself. We learn about the house's legacy, its relationship with the Baba Yaga, Baba Yaga's children as well. This is a story that really artfully combines elements of Eastern European folklore with family legacy and recognizing family heritage as well. I enjoyed this book. I really appreciated the spotlight on a sibling relationship. I felt like that was really explored with a lot of care. The setting was really unique, not just in the house, but also the sort of occupations that the siblings took on. They became performers, learning about their magic and learning about their relationship with not only their parents but their past was a really lovely part of this book as well. I also really enjoyed the writing style. It really fit with that modern fairy tale vibe. Overall, I really liked this. I don't think it was perfect. I do feel like the plot could have been explored perhaps a little more deeply, specifically because the author introduced a lot of side characters that sort of appeared and disappeared conveniently at times, but I do feel like the core elements of the story and the core characters of the story were handled with a lot of care, and I did really like this book, and it really was full of a lot of elements I personally enjoy, and I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars too. The next book I picked up was a book I had a lot of high expectations for, and that is The Hand of the Sun King by J.T. Greathouse. I was really looking forward to pick this book up. A lot of the tropes and reading over the synopsis, it really seemed like a book that could be a new favorite for me. And while I did like it, I would say I didn't love it, and my middling experience with it sort of left me feeling rather disappointed with it in the end, because elements of it I liked, but I just wanted more from the plot and the narration, that it just didn't fully deliver what I felt it could, if that makes sense. And in this story, we follow our main character, Wen Adler, and he is torn between two worlds. The world of his father, the one he has been raised in and sort of prepared for his entire life, the world of the Empire with its strict rules, its strict magic, and in preparation to become a part of this larger empire, Wen his entire life has been studying to take an examination to become one of the Emperor's mages. On the other side, though, his mother comes from a heritage of wild magic. She comes from a group of people who were colonized by the Empire, and in growing up, his grandmother always imparted with him the stories and the heritage of his people. So at the beginning of the story, Wen is kind of traveling down a path, and he's not really sure which direction he wants to go. Does he want to become a part of the Empire and support its colonial interests at the expense of basically turning his back on the other half of his heritage? This book is about Wen kind of moving its way up in the government, but also kind of struggling with this dissonance that he has his entire life. It's a story about connecting and finding magic, and has a lot of politics, and we follow Wen as he travels throughout the kingdom into different places as he's trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life. I like this book for the concepts. I just don't know if the execution was as strong as it could have been, if that makes sense. I couldn't help while reading this kind of comparing it to the Trader Baru Cormorant, which was a recent read for me as well, and one I love. And I just feel like that book really went for it and was highly political, very intense, and the pacing was spot on, where I couldn't help but feel like more time could have been spent sort of developing these really complicated and dangerous and emotional situations. I felt kind of like we were breezing through the story, breezing through certain emotional stakes. And while I liked a lot of the plot points, and I even liked sort of where we ended up at the end, I just can't say that the entire journey was as unputdownable as I feel like it could have been. Like, conceptually speaking, I liked this book. I just felt the execution was a little off. So I ended up giving it about 3 stars, maybe 2.75 stars. From there, I wanted plot. I was just really looking for something that would completely distract me, and so I decided to pick up Cibola Burn by James S.A. Corey. This is book 4 to the Expanse series, and wow, I loved this. I flew through this and I am truly having so much fun reading the Expanse series. It's making me love sci-fi. I don't know, just everything about it is just really working out for me. But this is the 4th book to a very beloved space opera series. In this world, we follow a variety of characters, but the political setup is humans have expanded beyond the reaches of Earth and have settled into new places like the Moon, Mars, and a system of space stations called the Belt. With these settlements, new governments have risen, and these governments also have a lot of tension between each other. At the beginning of book 1, we're introduced to one of our main characters, Jim Holden. He's a ship captain. He finds a piece of technology, sort of upends it all. You get the picture. A lot of stuff begins to happen from there, and we've moved into book 4. The reason why I love the Expanse series so much is that each book actually has a very defined plot. We're following mostly new characters, mostly a new, like, very intense sort of political situation, and they tend to be like very micro focused but still reflect the overall like large scale issue at play, which keeps the plot moving forward but also keeps the story very, very fresh because we have new scenarios and new people to interact with in every single book, which I think makes it great. Because if I only had Jim Holden to read, I don't know if I would love this series as much as I do, but because we have so many different angles to enjoy this world in, I think it just works very, very successfully. In this book, we find ourselves in a new settlement, and we basically have a group of colonists who got there first and are trying to set up a new place to raise their families. And at the beginning of the story, a new ship arrives on this planet with corporate and international government like expectations of trying to figure out what they want to do on this planet, and the colonists that already live there do not like this, sparking a very complicated conflict that is just very, very like Cold War to then hot war fast. If there's one thing I will say about James S.A. Corey's like books, they are explosive, constantly thinking of new ways to make me go, what in the world is going on? I can never put these books down. I fly through each one. I really love the 4th one. I feel like each one just gets better and better. This was my favorite so far, and I would give it 5 stars. I love these books so much. Next up, I decided to tackle an author that I literally thought I was never going to read, and that is Stephen King. I picked up Fairy Tale by Stephen King, which is his new release, and the reason why I decided to finally check out this author is because I thought this release really suited my personal taste. This is a portal fantasy, which I always love, and basically in this book we follow our main character Charlie. Charlie is a good kid, a stand-up kid. He's in high school, and at the beginning of this book he basically helps this older gentleman, and in helping him he basically also inherits a key to a portal to another world. He travels to this other world and he realizes that it's being taken over by this dark force, and Charlie finds himself kind of playing hero, trying to save not only this world but his world. It all gets complicated very, very fast. I liked this book. The first thing I'll say, I think the concept was really, really strong. I love portal fantasy, and I feel like I usually find it in middle grade. This concept of being transported to an entirely new place and following a character who has never encountered anything fantastical before, uncover and try to understand this new amazing world. I love that. And I do feel like Stephen King did a pretty good job kind of capturing that whimsical vibe in this book, and following our main character Charlie as he explores this new place was by far and away my favorite part. I do wish there was more of that. I feel like we could have had a more expanded view of this world with more details and just different scenarios. I feel like really could have brought this book to another level. I found the writing to be okay. For the most part, it was pretty engaging. I read this book actually pretty quickly for being almost 600 pages. Structurally, I liked how the chapters were set up. It was kind of like scene to scene to scene to scene within chapters. I found that sort of staccato nature to be just really quick and made this book a page turner. There was a lot of exposition, which I didn't mind, but it also meant I do wish there was actually like more on the back end to justify how much time was spent sort of setting this world up. I do feel like it was successful in creating like proper motivations and character connections. I actually feel like the weakest part of this book, the characters themselves. Charlie is likable because he doesn't really do anything to make him bad, but he also is just very vanilla. He's boring. I don't really feel like Stephen King gives him a very significant personality, to be honest. He almost just feels like a cardboard cutout of like the typical teenage hero in fantasy situation, if you know what I mean. Because of that, I just never felt truly connected to him. There were elements of like horror in this fantasy story, especially with some of Stephen King's descriptions. Some of them I felt were successful, some of them I felt like were a little cheap and kind of brought me out of the story. Overall, I liked this book. I will say I feel like I'll probably check out more Stephen King books, especially some of his other fantasy works. Unfortunately, I can't say that this blew my mind or blew me out of the water, but I thought it was okay and definitely worth the read if you like Portal fantasy. And I think I would give this like a 3.5 or 3.75 out of 5 stars. From there, I was craving just a fun and easy read, so I picked up Bloodbound by Patricia Briggs. This is the second book to the Mercy Thompson series, a urban fantasy series I started last month, and I just honestly kind of want to continue on. They're so fun. I read them so fast and they just scratch a part of my brain that I just enjoy, okay? I just love a steamy, intense, female-led urban fantasy story. I just think they're great. And Mercy Thompson is proving to be a very likable main character. But if you're not familiar, this series follows our main character, Mercy, who is a mechanic. She spends her days in her shop fixing cars. She lives in a smaller town in Washington State. Mercy is also surrounded by supernatural creatures. In her world, vampires, fae, werewolves, and the like all exist, and Mercy herself can actually transform into a coyote. In the first book, we were really focused on like werewolf business, but going into book 2, we were introduced to more vampire-based business, and I feel like the connections of these supernatural creatures in this town are starting to become more intertwined, and I really loved the escalation of this plot. One thing I will say about the series, I really do feel like there are stakes, like people die, and it's actually like very intense and very violent. So I feel like that element just always propels me through these books because I'm honestly on the edge of my seat. I also just like Mercy as a main character. I like seeing her problem solve, begin to grow and expand in her own powers, but the pacing is really spot on. Nothing is overnight, even from the first 2 books. Like the growth between her powers, I feel like is like perfectly paced, and also the complicated nature with some of the will they won't they, and the romance department I also is really well paced as well. So it just creates a very addicting, fun, entertaining, but also like well written like urban fantasy scenario. I liked book 2 even more than book 1, and I would give it like a 3.75 out of 5 stars. From there, I picked up one of my most anticipated YA fantasy releases, and that is Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn, book 2 to the Legend Boren cycle, and I just love this series. I don't read much YA fantasy anymore, but this is a series that to me is like a perfect example about what I love about YA fantasy. It's fun, it's so fast-paced, there's angst and character development, also like a really interesting and well thought out like fantasy plot and setting, cool magic, like character growth. It really has it all, and I really enjoyed book 2 almost as much as I loved book 1. But in this series, we follow our main character Bree, and she at the beginning of book 1 is grieving the loss of her mother. And in an effort to sort of run away from this grief, she decides to enroll in a very prestigious high school program on the UNC campus. But on her first night there, she actually witnesses a magical attack, introducing her to the world of magic, monsters, and demons, and a secret society based on the Arthurian legend and Arthur's Round Table, who have pledged themselves for the past 15 generations to fight these demons. Thinking that demons might actually have something to do with her mother's passing, Bree decides that she is going to try out out for the society and become one of their own in hopes of finding out more answers. And things really balloon from there, let's just say. There are trials and secrets. This is a story about bloodlines and heritage and legacy. Bree as a main character is the star of the show. She roots this book amazingly. There's friendships, there's a love triangle, and I'll say the angst level was really amped up going into book 2, making it just oh so entertaining. This series is just really compelling and so much fun to read while also being very emotional. Tracy Deonn is not scared to bring up hard conversations, include elements in her plots that really are rather hard-hitting, and also having some character scenarios that provide a lot of emotional stakes for our main character and the reader. Book 2 was honestly more explosive than book 1. I mean, we were running quite literally all over the place in this installment. It was a wild ride. We also got more insight into other areas of the organization that has to do with the Legendborn, and I found that to be the most interesting part of sort of the fantasy plot. I loved getting more information on how the organization itself worked, and also how the pursuit of power has really embedded itself over generations. In book 2, we also got to see the escalation of certain relationships, and the will they won't they was very, very strong in this, creating a highly entertaining situation intermixed a very hardcore and dangerous situation as well. And that is what I feel like YA does so well. Like, on the one hand, and in one chapter, everyone is fighting for their lives, but on the other hand, you're like, are they gonna hold hands? And I just feel like that mix works amazingly in this. If I had to have one complaint about this second installment, is because it moves so fast, I felt like we didn't really give Bree enough space to actually try to train her powers more, and a lot of her growth, which did exist, was kind of based more on intuition than actual like repetition to get better. This is not necessarily a unique issue to this book. You run into this quite a bit, especially in YA fantasy, but I really liked this. The concept, the characters, the writing are just so engaging. I was really looking forward to book 2. I had very high expectations for this book, and I feel like Tracy Deonn delivered, and I'm very excited for the next installment. I know it's going to be a long and agonizing wait, but if you love YA fantasy, definitely check this out. 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. And the last book I'm just going to quickly mention because I'm still in the midst of reading it, and that is The Golem and the Jinni by Helene Wecker. I am listening to the audiobook of this book and I am loving it. Everything about this book is delightful, from the writing style to the characters. Like, I am already so emotionally invested in this story, and I've only read 100 pages, but this is like everything I love in a book, and I have a feeling that this could be a new all-time fave. This is a story following a golem and a genie, and it's set in the turn of the century in New York City. We follow the golem as she arrives in New York after her maker unexpectedly passes away on the voyage there. She arrives in New York alone and also newly awakened, so she has very little like literal experience, so she finds herself listless. We also follow a genie who has been trapped inside of a lamp for the past 800 years, and he's accidentally let out in a metalworker shop in the Lower East Side. You see these two characters as they get embedded in their own neighborhoods in New York, and interspersed between their own like POV chapters, we also get these beautiful, insightful deep dives of different people that they run into in the neighborhoods that they're living in. This is a truly character-led story. I love the writing. I love the time and place. I love the care that the author sort of gives these beautiful, just sort of vignettes of people's life. Again, I've only read 100 pages, but I am loving this book. I'm so happy I finally picked it up. Definitely waited too long, but we got there in the end. You know what I mean? Alrighty guys, those are all the books I read for the month of November. Please let me know down below some books you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!